the things you learn, the longer you pursue genuinely walking with the Lord, is that there's a really big difference between who God is and who we think He is when we first start out. There's all kinds of fine print stuff they don't tell you when you first get started. And too often, we present a uniquely American Jesus, a uniquely American gospel that is sanitized of all those inconvenient things like, oh, I don't know, take up your cross and follow me. Or the Apostle Paul, I die daily. All these little inconvenient verses that don't work well on Christian television. But we learn, if we make the careful decision to not become bitter in the midst of the experiences of life, we learn that the greatness and the goodness and the richness and the beauty of God is not found in always having things our way. You know, as a parent, you want to bless your kids. You want your kids to have a better life than you had, and you want things to go better for them. And so you kind of get into the habit, right? Well, I'm going to get them this, and I'm going to give them that. But at some point, you've got to learn and realize, as my son looks at me in the front row wondering where this is going. At some point, you're doing your children a disservice if you don't begin to develop within them that sense of needing to appreciate things and work for things and strive after things and earn things. And that life doesn't always go right. And our success and our victory is not in things always going right, but in us always being right no matter how things go. That's the victory God gives us. That's the overcoming spirit. We can believe and pray and declare and prophesy, and we should. But if Hebrews chapter of faith teaches us anything, it teaches us that even the greatest heroes and giants of faith didn't always apprehend on this side the things that they saw. It didn't make it any less real or any less true. But they received it by faith in the Spirit, and their reward was on the other side of the veil, on the other side of time and space. I want to look at two scriptures today. One is a familiar psalm, and the second is a story from the book of Exodus. And I believe that this story is helpful to us today. But I want to start in Psalm chapter 139, a very familiar scripture. I already heard some mms around the room right there, because some of you are very familiar with Psalm 139. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's a beautiful psalm. It's extraordinary. But I want us to look at a few of the verses here. We'll start in the beginning. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know my sitting down, my rising up. You understand my thoughts afar off. You comprehend my path and my lying down. You're acquainted with all my ways. There's not a word on my tongue that, behold, O Lord, you don't know it altogether. You have hemmed me in behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is too high. I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go into heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall fall on me, even the night shall be light about me. Darkness doesn't hide me from you. The darkness and the light are both alike to you. And it goes on. This beautiful, beautiful psalm. But I want us to focus for one moment on one particular verse here. Verse 5. It says, you have hemmed me in behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. You've hemmed me in or hedged me in behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. I used to be so comforted by that verse. I remember my grandma Josephine knitted me before she died. Knitted or crocheted? What's the difference between knitting and crocheting? These are the deep questions that apostolic of leaders of today's church want to know. Is there a difference between, am I allowed to walk on the floor? Or, okay. Because sometimes there's trap doors and there's live stream problems and you never know. Okay, I'm a walker. So everybody pray for these two camera people because they're going to get put through their paces this morning. I'm a walker. Knitting and crocheting, what is the difference? Knitting is 2 needles, crocheting is 1. We never stop growing, Pastor Joe. I don't know if she knit it or crocheted it, and we're not going to find out now because she's gone. But anyway, Grandma Josephine made me was it a quilt or an Afghan? What? You got to tell me what's the difference between a quilt and an Afghan. I don't know. Inquiring minds want to know. We want to understand. I'm sorry. Anyway, she made me a blanket. And I still have Grandma's blanket. And there's still times on those balmy Buffalo days, all those beautiful, warm, sunny Buffalo days that come the 3rd week of July. But when that's not happening, I grab Grandma's blanket and I sit in my easy chair and I feel what? I feel hemmed in. I feel hedged in. I feel comforted. I feel surrounded. I remember her love. I remember her kindness. I remember her belief in me. And that, So I always thought that verse meant that that's what God does for us. Oh God, you hem us in. You put us in your big comforter, the Holy Ghost, and you just hem us in. That's not what this verse means at all. This is the problem with connecting to the Jewish roots of your faith. You find out that all kinds of stuff you thought is not at all what it's saying. Let me tell you what the Hebrew says in this verse. It says that God hems us in. What does it mean? It says God besieges us, confines us, cramps us in to a tight place, distresses us, lays siege to us. What? You have hemmed me in behind and before. You have laid your hand upon me, it says. So I had this tremendous misconception about God hemming me in. Turning your Bibles to the book of Exodus, chapter 13. I'm telling you what, your media crew is amazing. The minute I say a verse, it just magically appears on the screen behind me. My media team asks me beforehand to give them all the verses. They have not learned to flow in the Spirit like your media team has. I'm going to tell them that they've got to get what? Exodus 13, and beginning, please, with verse 17. We're picking up the story in Exodus 13 of the children of Israel on their way out of Egypt. Pharaoh, after 10 plagues, is finally allowing the children of Israel to exit out of Egypt. They're finally out of the land, but they're not in the promised land. They've got to go through the wilderness and all the drama that's going to happen there before they get into the promised land. So it says, and I don't know if it's not, are you able to easily, now just tell me the truth, are you able to easily switch versions, or is that difficult? Just because some of my notes line up with certain phrases. If we can do NIV, I think it would be, I actually prefer the New King James, but for this particular one, these notes are in NIV. Yes, this is the correct one. So it says, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. The title of my message this morning is The God Who Does Not Allow Shortcuts. The God who does not allow shortcuts. He didn't lead them, though that was shorter. For God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. And we're just going to go verse by verse and read through here. So God led them around the desert road. Somebody say desert road. God could not possibly lead anyone through a desert. That would have to be the devil. Toward the Red Sea, the Israelites went up out of Egypt armed for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph, and that's a beautiful one, but we'll go past that to verse 20. That's powerful. It's another verse. After leaving Sukkot, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. Somebody here this morning feels like they're on an edge of a desert, and you're going to leave here encouraged. Verse 21. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night, in a pillar of fire to give them light so that they could travel by day and by night. Neither the pillar of cloud nor the pillar of fire left its place in front of the people. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi-hahiroth between Migdal and the sea. They're to camp by the sea directly opposite Baal-zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around in the land in confusion, hemmed in, same word, Sa'ur, same word, hemmed in by the desert. Next verse. I'll harden Pharaoh's heart, he'll pursue them, but I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this. Now, I want us to get the context and understand the story here this morning. The children of Israel have been slaves in Egypt. They've been slaves in Egypt for how many years? 430. Boy, that was specific. My goodness. I'm buying her a coffee when we are done. Everybody else always says 430. Do you know the month they left? Okay. 430 years, the Israelites are slaves in Egypt. That's a lot of prayer meetings. That's a lot of prophetic words. That's a lot of waiting for your situation to change. 430 years of being told that we're really not supposed to be here. This isn't really how things are supposed to be. There's really a deliverer who's going to come and get us out of this mess. That's a long time to believe. That's a long time to not give up. That's a long time to persevere. That's a long time to lay hold of a promise. 430 years, they're slaves in Egypt. But then finally the day comes and Moses shows up. And Moses comes and he's got the staff in his hand, the rod in his hand, and he's leading the children out of Egypt, and they are giving him no end of grief. 430 years we're waiting, and you're the deliverer God sends us. Oh, leadership is such a joy. Moses is doing everything he can to bless and strengthen the people, and they are attacking him and murmuring and complaining every step of the way. Sometimes we complain and we murmur against the very process God has brought to us to bring us through to deliverance. Sometimes we murmur and complain against the very leaders God has put in our life to bring us through to where we're supposed to be. Yes, but you don't know this leader, he's got this fault. Yes, God knows he has that fault. God especially allowed that fault to be there to test your heart. Because there are no perfect leaders. And there are no perfect churches. This is a very nice church, but it's not a perfect church. How do I know this is not a perfect church? Because you're here. Because I'm here. Because there are no perfect people. Because we are all people in process, growing in grace by the love and mercy of God. So if we have an unrealistic expectation of perfection that we put on one another, and especially on our leaders, we're going to cripple the work of God. So they're complaining against Moses. They're murmuring against Moses. By the way, this is why Moses emerges as the lead hero in Judaism until today. Because Moses was one who, when God wanted to wipe them out, Moses changed God's mind. That's powerful. His intercession changed the mind of God. So he's venerated to this day for the power of his prayer and his persuasion with God. So they're coming out of Israel and they're complaining all the way. And God says, and let's go back, we'll kind of go back in all those verses we've familiarized, but we'll work through them now. So we'll start at verse 17. God says, I'm not going to lead you, verse 17 of chapter 13, I'm going to lead you. God did not lead them through the road to the Philistine country, though that was shorter. Why? For the Lord said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. Israel was out of Egypt. Egypt was not out of Israel. The mindset of slavery, the mindset of fear was still ingrained in the people. And so God had to lead them on a journey that was going to be transformative. One of the greatest travesties that the American church has foisted upon the world is this instantaneous Christianity. Get in a prayer line and have Cindy Jacobs prophesy over you and all your problems will melt away. I love the gift of prophecy. I get in every prayer line I can, but I still got to get up and go walk out everything that got downloaded to me. So we create a culture of spiritual addicts who float from this event to that conference to that church, and they never grow because they never pay the price of growth. You won't bear fruit if you don't take root. It's as simple as that. You've got to root yourself in a spiritual family. Christian maturity only happens in the context of relationships. Christian maturity only happens in the context of relationships. You've got small groups going on. That's awesome. Get in a small group. It's important to be in a small group. Why? Because you can look at the back of her head, lovely as it is, beautifully coiffed. You can look at the back of her head for the next 10 years, and you're not going to grow in grace by just sitting there. But when you get to know each other and you bump up against each other a little bit, then you begin to grow as the family of God. but it requires taking root. It requires shifting from a spectator mentality to saying, I am part of the family. I am part of the body. So Israel wasn't ready for this. Israel was still in a slave mindset, and they wanted the shortcut, but God said, no, I'm taking you. And how did he take them? Keep going here. What does it say next? He led them. So God led the people, verse 18, by the way of the wilderness. Wow. I seem to remember Jesus being in a wilderness. I seem to remember the Apostle Paul being in a wilderness. I seem to remember Moses spending, I think, 40 years in a wilderness. I seem to remember Joseph being thrown down into the wilderness of a pit. We love to read Bible stories. None of us want to live them. He said, I'm going to take you on the desert road. Somebody here this morning is on the desert road. And God's going to meet you on the desert road this morning. And you might not get off the desert road, but springs will begin to burst forth in the desert for you. And your desert will begin to blossom as the rose. God can provide for you in the desert. So the children of Israel in this place, Moses has this incredible pressure on him. He's got to lead this complaining, dysfunctional people. And so they're walking and they're moving and they're going forth, and the elders come to Israel, or come to Moses. The elders call a board meeting. And they come to Moses and they said, Moses, what are we doing? And verse 21 says, the Lord goes before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way. So the elders come and they say, Moses, what is the plan? We're out of Egypt, but we are sitting here in the wilderness. We've got no food, we've got no water, we've got no safety, we've got no defensible boundaries. What is the plan? Moses, where's the committee? Moses, I need the 5-year strategic plan. Moses, where's the budget? Moses, do you have job descriptions? Have you charted the critical path? And Moses says, you guys see that cloud? There's something about that cloud. I don't know, that cloud's different than the other clouds. I don't know why, but I feel really good when I look at that cloud. I think we should follow that cloud. Moses, this is your plan? Follow a cloud? Yeah, I really like that cloud. I think the Lord's in that cloud. We're going to follow that cloud. You do know that we're all crazy. Again, not in the fine print when you signed up. We're crazy according to the wisdom of this world. But we are alive unto God and wise in the ways of the Spirit. And Moses says, our executive 5-year budgeted job descriptioned plan is we're going to follow the cloud. So they start following the cloud. This man's been following the cloud in Whippany, New Jersey for 30-some years. You say, what's the secret to the success of this great church? Where his presence goes, we go. Where his presence stops, we stop. When he moves, we move. But we are nothing without his presence. This is how Moses leads them. What happens next? So now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel that they turn. Can we get that up on there, chapter 14 in the NIV if you have it? Yes, perfect. Tell the Israelites to read the next two words. See, we just glance over these words. You don't just tell 1 million people, hey, turn around. Do you see that? We just glance over the word like it's nothing. You're telling 1 million people to turn back. That's difficult enough as it is. If you ever had to do that in Jersey, forget it. It's an absolute impossibility. Whoever invented jug handles should go down in history. Oh, I have to just... Every time I come to this state, I have to just give my heart to Jesus all over again. Because where I want to get to is right there across that street. But I somehow have to go to Connecticut to be able to get there. You know, it's 150 yards away, but it's going to take 17 miles to be there. Lord. Tell the Israelites, turn around. Moses, what are you doing? We just made camp. We just set up the tents. We just got the firewood. We just got this all together. What do you mean turn around? Why are we turning around? Cloud, cloud, cloud. What? Again with the cloud. This guy's crazy. Where's the cloud bringing us? Tell them that they're to encamp between Pi-Hahiroth, between Migdal and the sea. They're to encamp by the sea. Oh, good. A totally indefensible border that we cannot escape through. Verse 3. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around in the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And not only did Pharaoh think that, the Israelites thought that. They thought, what is this crazy leader doing? Following this cloud that's bringing us into this impossible situation. But God says, I'm going to gain honor over Pharaoh and all his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. Now it was told to the king of Egypt that the people of Israel had fled, verse 5, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. So he made his chariot ready and took them with him, 600 choice chariots. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh. When Pharaoh drew near, verse 10, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were very, verse 10, very afraid. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. Somebody here this morning is very afraid. You're very afraid of the doctor's report you received this week. You're very afraid of the balance in your bank account right now. You're very afraid of what's going on in your marriage, in the life of your teenager, your grandchild. You feel like you're in a desert and you've been following this cloud and you feel hemmed in and forgotten and in the most vulnerable place you can possibly be. And God sent me here from Buffalo, New York this morning to tell you God has not forgotten you. And you are not going to die in that wilderness. God is going to get you through this. Israel is terrified. The sea is on one side. The desert is on the other side. The mountain is on this side. And Pharaoh's army is coming straight at them. They're in an impossible situation. And Moses does what he's always done. He talks to God. He says, God, you've brought me here. You spoke to me in that burning bush. You saved me when I was an infant. You've been writing this odd script of my life that wouldn't make sense to anyone else, but somehow I see the finger of God writing the script of my life in the good times, the bad, the mountains, and the valleys. And Moses is there in this moment of ultimate desperation, asking himself, have I just made the biggest mistake of my life? And have I led my people into destruction? And is this the end? And were they right? Would it have been better for us to go back to Egypt? That's what Moses is saying, and he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know where to turn. He doesn't know where to go. Psalm 139. You have hemmed me in before and behind. You haven't coddled me with a warm blanket. You've laid siege to the issues of my life so that I could be brought to an impossible situation, so that I could know God. And Moses is there in that impossible moment. And he can't go forward. He can't go sideways. He can't go backward. But he remembers this. He remembers his relationship with God. You've hemmed me in before and behind. You have laid your hand upon me. And when Moses can't move forward and can't move backward, and when you can't turn to the right or the left, and when you don't know which way to go, and you don't know what step to take, and you don't know what direction to move, there is one direction you can go. You can go down on your knees in prayer under the hand of a mighty king, under the hand of a mighty God who has laid his hand upon your life. And in that place, you're not moving in any direction. You're moving downward in humility and upward in relationship. And the voice of God comes. And Moses meets God there. And God says, now Moses, get up. Take that shepherd's rod that you used for 40 years in the wilderness and stretch that rod out over the sea of impossibility. Because that which is impossible to man is what God specializes in. God is God because he likes impossible situations. He gets to show off. And the sea opens. The sea parts. And the children of Israel walk through the waves. And all of a sudden, the slavery of Egypt breaks off of them forever. And 4 weeks ago, in Jewish tables all across the world, they said, we were slaves in Egypt, but our God worked a mighty deliverance for us. Listen. The great grandchildren of those in that story told the story and remembered it a few weeks ago, and their identity was resecured because they were coming out of Egypt also. And the trial that you're about to come out of, your children are going to be freed. Your grandchildren are going to be freed. Their grandchildren are going to be freed. Your spiritual and biological line is going to say, yeah, our family was messed up, but Grandpa held on to God and got a word from the Lord. Grandma held on and God worked a mighty work, and our whole family was redefined. If you're in the wilderness, if you're in an impossible situation, you're hemmed in by God because he's about to work mighty deliverance on your behalf.